Welcome back, everybody, and you're listening to the Raw Knowledge Podcast with your host, as ever, myself, Alex Connor, and we're back with another thought-provoking conversation with another brilliant mind and expert in his field. And today I am joined by Dr. Jacob Harden. Thank you for joining me. Have I pronounced that right? Have I got it all spot on?
So you got it, man.
Beautiful.
Perfect. Thanks for having me on.
Absolute pleasure. Absolute pleasure. Now, paint us a bit of a picture. I mean, I'm here, as the listeners or most of the listeners know, in Australia. What time is it there, Jacob? And what's been going on today?
It's 6 o'clock at night right now. So I'm a chiropractor over here in Orlando, Florida. So I'm over on the East Coast. And I know that flight to Australia, it's horrid. I've done it a number of times now. But yeah, so the time difference is huge. Yeah, about 6 o'clock here. So like I said, I'm a chiro. I run Orlando Sports Rehab out over here, and I've been in private practice now. I guess I'm in my 7th year of practice, and focusing primarily on people who are trying to remain active or get back to being active. But rehab is kind of the name of the game for me. And I also teach continuing education to coaches and clinicians on how to mitigate and manage injuries.
Fantastic. I appreciate the brief overview. And, you know, as I ask all my guests, I'd love to explore, before we get into it, why you do what you do, or perhaps any protagonists or elixirs that were sort of a bit of a gateway into doing what you do. Was it a random sort of passion you stumbled across, or was it something that you always had your heart set on?
Oh gosh, no. I haven't told this story in a while. It was the most random thing for me, for real. Back up, I've been in sports and athletics and all that my entire life. Like, grew up an athlete, stayed an athlete, all that. Decided I wanted to do something medical. Like, by the time I was in my junior year in high school, I took my first like A&P course, anatomy and physiology, and was like, oh yeah, like I want to do something here. So went to the University of Texas, got a human bio degree, but I finished my undergrad and I finished my bachelor's degree, which is a 4-year degree, in like 3.5. So I was like super burnout by the time I got out of undergrad. And so the thought of like medical school was overwhelming at that point. And I was like, I can't do more school right now. And so I took a year off and just was like, all right, what am I going to do now? So I moved back home with my parents and just worked a part-time job. Well, my family moved to Florida from Texas, and I decided, all right, well, I can go live at the beach. That sounds like a great idea. So went out and moved to Florida with them. And I was actually this is where it gets to be like the most random story that how I fell into chiro. But we're at the beach, and like I run into the ocean, and my cell phone's in my pocket, and I just like kill it. It's dead. So we have to go get a new phone. And at the time, like I'm looking for a new gym because I have just moved to this area. And the guy in the AT&T store, he overhears me talking about wanting to find a gym. He's like, oh, you need to go out to the YMCA out in Port Orange, which was about 30 minutes from my house at the time. And he's like, yeah, it's really good. They have everything you want it right there. And this is back in 2010. So I go out there and get myself a membership. I'm going for maybe like 2 weeks. Well, it ends up it's right next to this chiropractic school. And I literally know nothing about chiropractic at the time, other than my dad went to a chiro because he was dealing with some back pain, like maybe 5-6 years prior. And so I kind of researched into it a little bit, and it's like, okay, so it's hands-on. But like I can start to picture this like, okay, I could like maybe be with like sports and, you know, maybe help people who like to lift weights and stuff. Like I'm into that. So that'd be fun to make a job. So went and took a tour of the school, and, you know, they kind of explained what it was all about to me and everything. And I was like, okay, I'm in. I'm going to do this. At that point in my life, like I said, I had been working like a part-time job and like customer service And I was like, I am not doing this for the rest of my life. I need to figure, like, I was roaring and ready to get back into school at that point. Burnout was gone. And so I literally like applied that afternoon and was like, okay, I'm doing this. I'm going to do it. I'd also looked at like physical therapy as well. And because there was a good school for that, maybe like an hour and a half away, but just like, I was going to be able to like stay at home. I was gonna be able to kind of save some money going through school. So I decided to go with chiro. And yeah, literally from killing my cell phone and looking for a squat rack is what basically got me into chiro. But I was that guy who stepped into chiropractic school, never been in an office before in my life, never been adjusted, hadn't like, yeah. So I definitely did not like dream of this or anything. It literally fell into my lap.
I think it's always interesting to ask that question because people assume that, oh, this is what you've always done. And maybe you just woke up one day and it had this light bulb moment, or, you just walked into school and you were like, I'm just amazing at this. And oftentimes it's like you said, it's through a series of experiences and events in your life that bring you towards these, I guess, passions, if you will, which I think is more authentic and organic and usually leads to a better relationship as a practitioner, as you've been in the industry a long time,
Yeah.
which
Yeah.
is a testament.
It gives me my own perspective on it. Some people some people in my class they're multi-generation chiros.
Mm.
And, they grew up in it. They've worked in the office their whole life. They always knew they were going to go do that and everything. Yeah, that was not me. But hey, I got my story. I think my story is pretty cool. I'm happy I did it. But it was really just where I was in my life, right place, right time. And that's how I fell into the situation.
Yeah. And
But
that's
it's worked
often,
out so far.
yeah, you seem to be doing a lot of good work for a lot of good
I
people.
hope so. I
Yeah.
hope so.
I'd love to talk about some definitions now and
Okay.
slay a few sort of, I guess, not misconceptions just yet, but more people getting confused. So we've got we've got many practitioners, but I often find that a lot of people or a lot of clients that I work with, and I work with an amazing team of allied professionals as well. We've got chiropractors, we've got osteopaths, we've got physios. I find that trifecta is most commonly mistaken. I find that there's obviously practitioners who can do cross roles. Perhaps before we get started, could you give a brief definition of the three, what the differences are, and if so and when there's crossovers between the practitioners? And I guess for audiences listening, people, how to identify which one to go to. I often find people or my clients are like, I'm not really sure. And I'm like, right, well, let's kind of identify what's going on here, etc. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Well, I can only speak to the States. I know it's a little different over on y'all's side.
Mm-hmm.
But so in the States, the easiest one to kind of differentiate is the DO, the osteopath. And they have mostly become a alternate version of an MD, medical doctor.
Mm-hmm.
So they go through medical school programs. I think they get some training on osteopathic manipulation as well. But at least over here, they are primarily medicine and primarily medically based, have the same scope of practice as an MD. Now, a chiro, and over here it's a physical therapist, we pretty much have the same scope of practice as well, in that we can do all the same things. If I were to differentiate the two, I would say that physical therapists, chiros, let's start with there. Chiros are more akin to a orthopedic outpatient physical therapist, because there's many different specialties within physical therapy. Inpatient, there's neuro, cardiac, all these other types of rehab that chiro is not going to get any real training in anything like that. So we're much more like outpatient orthopedics. And so that's kind of where you can make that comparison. And also probably where I guess most of your clients and are going to be seeking out is kind of that orthopedic type of care. Now, as to who should you see, I don't know that it should be the profession that you really are looking for, but rather the practitioner. Because I can tell you, I do not treat anything like probably what the picture of a chiro is in your mind.
Mm-hmm.
I rarely adjust anyone or do spinal manipulation. I primarily spend my time talking to my patients, getting to know them, educating them, and then coming up with exercise programs. And that might look, I think that probably fits the picture of a physical therapist or a physiotherapist a lot more from most people, or maybe even an exercise physiologist over there. So it's not necessarily which practitioner or which, profession you should go to. I guess if you really are like, I really want spinal manipulation, you
Mm.
probably have a better odds of getting someone who's really good at that if you go to a chiro. If you're saying like, I really need post-op surgical rehab, you're probably better finding a physical therapist for that, just because the training is not there as much in chiro. But that doesn't mean that you couldn't find a good chiro who could do those things. You couldn't find a good physical therapist who couldn't do manipulations. And that's why I say find the practitioner more so, because there is so much overlap between them.
Yeah, sounds like there's a lot of gray areas, but I think, as you said, finding the right person as well, and then someone who's got that duty of care and that can really understand, is always a great place to lead off with. I find that, and this might be a really good segue into misconceptions, Jacob. I find a lot of people, when they go chiropractic, they go, oh, hang on a minute, or he's going to snap my neck and he's going to click me, and then you're like, well, that's not, everything's kind of got a bit of a stereotype around it. Do you find that when you have a lot of clients come to you, there's a lot of those misconceptions or, I guess, fears around what you're actually going to do for them? Or do you think most people are quite oblivious to, hey, look, I'm in pain. Can you just take it away? And from that, I sort of want to lead into what the concept of doing your homework in terms of, I think a big misconception is a lot of people expect to come in and just bang, it's going to be perfect. You're going to give me the magic pill and I'm going to be sweet. Whereas oftentimes, and this might be different to the way you practice, what you will go over with them, what you will educate them on, it's something that they can generally do and take home or into the gym. Again, the rehabilitative work that is going to assist in that continuous recovery, or in this case, prevention, which is usually better than cure.
Yeah. So I guess to take the first part of that, are there misconceptions with patients that kind of walk into my office? Not as much these days for me. And I can only speak for me because I've established what I do. And so people who come to see me know what I do, and they know what I'm about. And like, I'm very clear on this message. Whenever you go to my clinic website, you won't see a therapy table in a picture on the website. I don't even mention a passive therapy. I mention exercise. I mention how we're going to give you a program. I mention all these things because I want to attract the person who wants that. So I don't tend to get a lot of people coming into my office who are like, oh, wait, are you going to, I'm a little worried about getting adjusted here, because most of the people who are coming to see me aren't really looking for that. Usually when someone's coming to see me, they have been to the other guys and they've gotten manipulations and they've gotten passive therapies and they've gotten manual therapies and stuff. And they haven't gotten better. And so now they're at a point of, okay, I need to figure this thing out. And usually they follow me on social media or something, or they maybe found us on Google and liked what the message said on the website. So I don't personally see that kind of stuff very often. It's not like it doesn't happen, but it's pretty rare. Now, I can contrast that to my wife is also a chiro. She works in another office, which is a little bit closer to our house. And it's a little more, I think, what we consider to be standard practice for a chiro office. And their patients are coming in specifically because they are looking for spinal manipulation and like they're looking for traditional chiropractic care. And so I don't know that they even get those kind of misconceptions like, oh, what are you going to do? because most people walking into a chiro office specifically kind of know what they're getting. I don't know what the statistic is now. We treat like 8% of the population or something like that. So most of us know, okay, this is good for back and neck pain. And that's kind of how they think of like traditional chiropractic care. And, but usually people kind of know what it is going into it, or they have some sort of idea of it, even if that is like, oh, you're going to crack my back, right? If that's what they think it is, then they're probably walking in thinking that's what it is. But yeah, we don't. I used to get more of that, I would say maybe like 4 or 5 years ago when I was a little earlier into practice and hadn't established myself as much. But these days, not as much.
Yeah. And I guess this is a good point to address something that I really like about what you do. And you just mentioned sort of how your wife's practice operates more traditionally versus yourself. You have a waiting lounge or where people can have a coffee, have a tea. It's a different environment. Imagine it's a different feel, the look, the music, etc. And if I'm not mistaken, if memory serves, you've got like a viewing area where people can actually see, you know, the therapy with other people sort of being put in place. So, and you pride yourself as well on like really cutting edge, timely bookings, which I really appreciate, because I know a lot of people, we come in and we're like, right, I always say to my clients, give me a 5-minute discrepancy. If someone's going to ask a question, they're paying good money right as I leave. As long as it's not a big one, I'm going to try and assist them. But again, setting expectations is huge. How did you come to that model, and how have you found it beneficial? I guess apart from the obvious points for your clients, and again, creating that experience. And I think to caveat that, the reason why I want to talk about this is because, as the saying or the maxim goes, people forget what you do for them. They'll even forget who you are, what your name is, but they'll never forget how you make them feel. And I do believe that a signature of a world-class professional in any area, and what keeps people coming back, is the experience. Obviously the results, but more so the experience that's provided to them. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah. So to kind of paint the picture, our office is one giant open room. Like, we do not have a wall other than the outside walls. So we do have maybe like one area where we have a massage therapist who rents the office with us as well. And like, he has a curtain that he can pull back for privacy. And we can do that for exams if we need to as well.
Mm-hmm.
But other than that, it's one big open room. You walk in, we have this big, like 8-foot, 9-foot coffee bar that I built specifically to go into the office. So you can make your coffee when you come in. And I wanted it to be like this relaxing feel. And then you can go a little further, and we have like a love seat and a couch and a coffee table there that you sit down. And I do all of my consultations at the coffee table, because it's just a relaxing environment. It's a de-threatening environment. It's different than me sitting on the doctor's stool and the patient sitting on the table, and I'm sitting here like scribbling notes. I like to approach my patients much more as a peer who is trying to help them through something, than an authority who, you know, maybe they like just go down the list and answer all these questions. So I try to make it relaxed. So then we have kind of just a big open area, and we have a big kind of squat rack rig set up with all of our weights, where we do most of the rehab, all of our free weights. And so if a patient comes in and they're coming in early, they are usually going to get to watch us working with the other guy that's before them. And that has a number of benefits. One, and I think the main one that I want, well, there's a big one for business. It shows them that they're not the only person getting seen here, which, you know, is always a little, that shows some confidence.
Yes.
But the other thing is, it's good for people who are experiencing pain to see other people experiencing pain and managing it. It's, you know, we have one of the things I try and do is to help my clients develop self-efficacy. So their belief in their ability to succeed at tasks. And so if you see somebody else succeeding going through pain, it doesn't even have to be the same pain as what you're dealing with or the same injury, but you just see, hey, that person that person had some pain at the end of their set and it kind of settled down and they can kind of see that they're okay with it. Yeah, that can help instill a belief that they can do that too. And so I want people seeing other people putting work in. I think it's actually one of the big benefits of group training and group therapy is that it's the kind of a community aspect without necessarily being an interactive community aspect. So I wanted that. And yeah, I definitely pride myself on timely bookings and trying to make sure that there's not a wait, because I can't stand it myself. And I try and, abide by the golden rule, treat others the way you want to be treated. And I can't stand waiting in doctor's offices. So I'm trying to be pretty timely with it. And I drive an hour to get to my office. So I'm like, all right, I'm going to show up on time. I want you showing up on time where everything's going to run smoothly here. All right, we get behind every now and again, but it's not too bad.
Yeah, no, for sure. I think it's good because oftentimes we provide a service and we don't realize it that we would want, and that can be a double-edged sword. But you then attract, I think the benefit of that is the type of clients that you want to treat, who have the right attitude, and you lead by example, which is important. And well, I think first of all, that coffee bar that you built, I think that's phenomenal. Life's too short to have bad coffee, so
100%.
that's an absolute plus. And I've noticed as well that a lot of people who are innovating in this space, for example, even the dentist that I go to now, which a good friend of mine in Slovenia, he's coming over and working at this practice. That's how I found them. And so I sort of went from a traditional practice to this one, and kind of to echo what you were saying, like it's a totally different experience for people who want something more relaxed. Like they've got like a library and the same sort of thing, like a little bar. There's even a place where you can wash your teeth if you forget. And it doesn't look and feel like a medical environment. And I think one of the benefits to that is because obviously there's a lot of fear around, especially in the medical space, whether it's a hospital or a dental practice, which is associated with pain, or if you've had a childhood, I guess not horror story, but a bad experience, then that kind of really helps alleviate that. And so I think like what you're doing with that open space is phenomenal. Like you said, it's not going to be for everyone, but for someone who wants something which is a little bit more, I guess, untraditional, or not as, I guess, sort of uptight, or really sort of, I don't know what the word I'm looking for is, but it's got a different demeanor, and I think having that relaxed environment is key, especially in an area where there may be pain, and management being the key words there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we do quite a few things differently at OSR, and I think that just kind of is part of it. Like the way I treat is also very different than standard practice, I think, for rehab, in that I tend to not recommend my clients come in all the time and have them just doing their exercises in the office. I tend to focus much more on homework and having people do things on their own. And so it's just a different feel from the moment you walk in, but also, we're going to sit down. It's going to be an hour-long appointment, and you're going to be with me, and I'm going to spend 30 minutes of that getting your story and just talking to you and figuring out kind of where you're struggling and what your goals are and what you've done so far, and then we'll get into moving and, loading things and figuring out what a plan is. And it really becomes it's a group effort between me and the patient. So we want to come up with this plan together and then help the patient kind of execute on that plan. But it's not the just kind of traditional, you come in, you wait to be seen, then you go into a room, you lay down, you get your hot pack, you get your stim, then the doctor's going to come see you, and, snap, crackle, pop, rub, whatever. And here, do 3 sets of 10 on these 2 exercises. All right, pay the lady up front, and we'll see you next time. Like, I don't like that. I don't want that. I want it to be, I want to operate much more like a consultant. You are coming in because you have a problem and you are struggling somewhere to do something in your life. Pain is that barrier that is stopping you, or that you at least think is stopping you from doing that. and I can provide you with some professional guidance on what the next steps are to help get you back towards your life. And so I wanted to have that feel to it, not I don't want to come across as a technician where you come in and I do something to you, which is like, I don't want to take on that role as a fixer. I want to take on that role of like, I'm facilitating something for, and helping guide this, this decision process and helping to guide you forward. But ultimately it's what we do together, and, that's going to get you there. So yeah, it's been a little bit of a different process, but that's kind of why I want it to be more of a relaxing environment where we can just kind of sit down and have an open, honest conversation and then get to work as well.
That makes sense, I think. And again, it's not, everyone sort of has their own methods of how they do things, and people like different things, and that's always good. But I do find that from what I've learned about coaching and communication, exploring the answers that already exist in the room via empowerment and presenting options, and not, like you said, being the fixer or giving the magic bullet or the single answer, getting people to think and expand, perhaps laterally, critically thinking rather than on and off, and having that sort of, as you said, being more of a guide, like a problem solver, a facilitator of a bigger solution for them, I think often is a better way, because it's like the old saying, like, give a man a fish, teach a man a fish. If you can give them some level of education and a definition and some purpose, perhaps that they can start to put those pieces together and prevent in the future, but understand their bodies without, as I always say, being a rocket scientist, because people don't need to know it that in depth, but being, making it applicable and simple for people to understand, I think is a massive overlook. I think some people get to a level of education where they confuse people more than actually empower them, which is a bit of a shame. Because it's our role, I think, as practitioners to distill complex concepts and I guess problems, and then be able to provide, without oversimplifying, simple solutions. And I know one of my friends who's a very good practitioner, who is an osteopath, and he put a post up the other day, and I reshared it, and it said, I used to fix simple problems with complex solutions. Now I fix complex problems with simple solutions. I'm sure you've heard of it.
Yeah.
I thought that was
like,
an absolute
it's like
cracker.
Einstein said. Einstein has a quote that says, explain things as simply as possible and no simpler. And I think that it really is very important, because the human body is a very complex system, and complex, going back to kind of definitions, complex meaning many interconnecting pieces and many different moving parts, where changing one piece can have large ramifications across the whole system. And so, and it doesn't necessarily mean it's complicated, but there's a lot of moving pieces, and we can't really control all the moving pieces. Whenever we set up a training program for somebody, whether it's rehab or fitness at all, we can sit here and we can think about, all right, this is what we saw today in our testing, and we now know what your rep maxes are, and here's the exercises, and here's the perfect sets and reps, and all that goes out the window the second that they haven't slept for 3 days, and they're overstressed, and now, like, everything's fluctuating because it's a complex dynamic system that we're using here and that we're interacting with. And so, yeah, the simpler solutions tend to be better, and really the less assumptions we can make about the system, the better as well. Take the evidence in front of you, operate off that evidence, and then view the response to whatever you did as the evidence to make the next decision.
It's like a sequential sort of problem solving equation.
It's like it's kind of Bayesian inference.
Yeah. The Bayesian stuff that's interesting. I've listened to a little bit of that on the Stronger by Science podcast, and there's yeah, right. So there's, and sometimes they're like, well, when we say Bayesian, people are going to switch off. It's like, yeah, no, but it's Yeah, that is some fascinating concepts for sure.
Yeah, essentially starting with some known information and then updating the probability that something will be true or something will happen as you gather new evidence.
Well, I think that's the difference between the anecdotal and, the science or the documented science that we have. And we've always got to find this balance as a practitioner, because if we just go, oh, it's all the way the book says, we often find out when we actually get in the field and on the tools, as some people would say, that's not actually what I read in the textbook, but it's slightly different, but it works. And it's like, okay, well, that experience is now warranted, or it's not invalid, because if it's worked, it's worked. And I think ultimately when we look at science, it's just a collection of recorded anecdotal evidence anyway. So it's a backward concept. We might not go down that rabbit hole. But you mentioned before as well, we talked about homework. I'd love to get your opinion on and your experiences of how you successfully help your clients complete their, quote unquote homework, maybe some of the verbiages, some of the tools, or what that sort of conversation looks like. Because I know that is always one of the most challenging parts, especially for me, or when I refer out, sometimes people are not invested in it. And I sort of say, hey, look, like, I get it. Sometimes things can be mundane, and I might recommend putting a podcast on, i.e. this one. There you go, shameless plug, or a YouTube or something like that. So as you might be doing some stretching or rehabbing, you might break it down to a smaller incremental part, but you do something that you can still have a focus on, which might be more mentally stimulating, but it's not taking away from the homework or the task. What have you found that works in your experience with that, for perhaps people who push back a little bit or struggle to get it done?
Yeah. So the first thing I would have to say there is, if rehab or the extra anything you're prescribing is random, then it appears random, it's perceived as random by the patient, then you are asking for adherence issues. And so the rehab needs to be directed to the patient's goals and their motivations. What is it they want to be able to get back to doing? And that really, moves us away from saying, all right, well, there's a certain rehab for a diagnosis, more to there's a rehab for a person going through with an injury that might have a diagnosis. And the way you can think of this is that the early on, I would say the more limited the person is, let's say that we have 3 different people. One is a baseball player, one's an Olympic weightlifter, and one is a, just gen pop, doesn't exercise, doesn't really do anything, sedentary individual. They're all dealing with acute shoulder pain and can't really lift their arm out to the side. Because they are all so limited, the rehab is probably all going to look pretty similar up front. It might include some isometrics with the arm kept tucked in pretty close to the side, trying to just let things calm down and get some motion. But as their functional ability expands, it becomes less about, like, first we've rebuilt their ability to be a human being with a shoulder, but now they are a person with certain goals that they are trying to get to. And now these paths really start to diverge drastically, because someone is having trouble putting their dishes away on the top shelf. Somebody wants to be able to, throw 150 kilos over their head, and somebody wants to throw a 90-mile-an-hour fastball. And those are way different demands that we have to like view that differently. And so whenever we prescribe something, it needs to be directed to where is that patient kind of on their path and in their timeline, but also what is their end goal. So I like to start with the end in mind and only move as far backwards as possible or as necessary. Like, for example, I have a young baseball player right now who's dealing with a shoulder injury, and it only hurts him when he throws. And specifically, it only hurts him whenever he throws. Last we talked about 60 feet.
Right.
So he can sit there and we can toss the ball in the office because we're about 20, 30 feet apart and he's fine. Now, do I need to pull him back to doing TheraBand external rotations? Or can I just have him throw at 45 feet and then gradually increase the dosage? Well, the only thing he's really limited in is throwing, and specifically at this particular volume and intensity that we found. So what if we just made the rehab throwing? That's something that he loves to do. It's something he does all the time. And it's something that it's already part of his life, to go and do that. Now, and he also has a strength conditioning routine, and we're going to focus and put in a few things there, but we're integrating into what he's already doing. And so the adherence ends up being much better because I've set it up, where it's according to his goals. If we pull him back and just basically make it appear like we are just assigning exercises, then yeah, I can understand why people maybe don't want to do it, especially if they feel like they're capable of much more. And many times they are. Like people that have back pain, not many of them probably need to be doing a bunch of clamshells. Like if you have back pain when you're squatting, hey, why don't we try squatting? Having back pain when you're deadlifting, maybe we should try deadlifting. And in the meantime, let's also think about some alternative exercises that you could do within your training that make you work really hard and get you a good training effect. And then, you can do this other stuff as part of your warm up or cool down somewhere, it fits in a slot.
Yeah.
So we have to think about it like that first. If we start to assign exercises purely with the thought that this is to reduce pain. Like this exercise here is to reduce pain. And it's a very pain focused sort of prescription. Then one, we don't really have any evidence or any inclination of how often that patient should be doing that exercise. If we have somebody who has back pain, I have them do some cat cows. And so hands and knees, spine going up and down, right? And we know that relieves their pain. I have nothing to say they should be doing that 3 times a day, for 15 reps at all. All I really have, and this kind of goes back to what we were saying, like work with the evidence in front of you. The evidence in front of me says this relieves their pain when it's there. It doesn't say their pain will get worse if they don't do it. They're not in back pain due to a lack of cat cows. And, we don't know that doing those cat cows is going to be prophylactic and prevent the pain from getting worse. So how I would prescribe those things is on an as needed basis. If your pain gets to a level that you feel like you would like to reduce it to some degree, here's a strategy that you can do that, but it's not necessarily prescribed. Where I'm going to prescribe things is here is a specific limitation, a function that you have, a certain activity which is limited for you. And this is a scaled back version of that, which is a stepping stone to help you begin to tolerate that thing. And that is a goal-oriented, activity-oriented type of rehab that is, I can explain how that is a very direct path to getting to where you want to go. And that really will help improve the adherence to the program because we've laid out that path and we can help the patient really see this is where we're trying to go. So if you need to pick up the 20 kilo bag of dog food, well, hey, you know what, that 10 kilo kettlebell over here, how that one wasn't, you could pick that one up, but then like the 15 kilo that was like teetering on the edge of your symptoms. Well, once you start doing the 10 and it starts to feel okay, the 15 is going to start to feel okay. And then we'll get to the 20. And, then we give you a little buffer room. We'll get you up to that 25 and 30. And guess what? That 20 kilo bag of dog food isn't going to hurt so bad anymore once you're tolerating those forces. And so it makes a lot more sense to people whenever we kind of relate it back to what it is they're actually trying to do in the first place. But that starts by identifying what that is and helping the patient understand that maybe why they're here isn't solely because they hurt, but rather that them hurting has taken something from them and they want it back.
Yeah, I love that. I think the positioning of what you're prescribing and the specificity of it and having that graded approach. And you made a lot of good examples in there, and I appreciate using real life examples because they're more relatable for people. And this is kind of stumbling across an area which I'd love to delve into a little bit before I get more specific with three types of what I would foresee as the main types of pain that people suffer with. But it's this approach where, and now pain science is super complex, and we could go down the rabbit hole on that. But if we have a client, we have a patient, let's say they've got knee pain, and we go, okay, we've done the checks, we've made sure there's nothing catastrophic happening structurally or whatever it might be. We've done our due diligence, and then we go, right, can we do X movement pattern? No. Okay, I would use an RPE guide, like if I was training to an intensity. And we would look at going, well, sometimes we might get a little bit of discomfort, but if we don't do something, and I think, again, a lot of the guys I work with, we try and keep mobile. We try to keep doing the thing. I think, and again, like yourself, a lot of great practitioners are doing that. You tell someone to do nothing, I think it's worse, and two, they're not going to do it. So it's about finding things they can do. But in your opinion, where is that threshold where it's, okay, like we need to do something? There might be a little bit of discomfort, but obviously if we go too far, there's going to be too much. I like to position that with RP, as I've said, but also how does it feel at the time? How does it feel afterwards? And what about 24 hours afterwards, to give us an indication of, can we, it's, I use the analogy that was used on another podcast, Iron Culture, like having a pen light in a cave. Like we kind of need to see where we can go, but we need to shine a little bit of light. We don't want to cause any damage, but we might need to have a little bit of discomfort to see if we can sort of move forward in that direction, or do we need to take a backward step and move in a different one? And again, I don't know how you approach that and even position that with the client, because we all have different perceptions, hence the name, rated perceived effort.
Rated perceived exertion, yeah.
Yeah, exertion, that's the one. So it's sort of like, well, do we push up to a 4 or 5? Or do we go, no, we don't do that. We need to back off and find something different. And how do we sort of get that across to the client without them going, oh, no, there's just a little bit, I can't do anything at all. Do you see where I'm coming with that? It's a very sort of, it's a fine line between we need to do something, but again, we don't want to cause the client any, I guess, chronic pain.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. So this is, it's a very fine line, like you said, but the way you described it is perfect. We look at symptoms in the moment. We also want to look at symptoms afterwards. We want to look at symptoms maybe 24 hours afterwards, because we know that sometimes symptoms can kind of blow up on you the next day or so. I would say the further out we get from the bout of loading that we did, the less likely a flare-up in symptoms is related to that bout. I think it's reasonable to assume. So we've done our due diligence. As we're saying, we know that this isn't a macrostructural type of injury that we are seriously worried about causing more harm, right? Well, in that case, we can start to say, okay, well, the symptoms and the level of symptoms you're experiencing might be the guide for too much or too little, right? We're essentially trying to increase your objective output while decreasing or at least maintaining symptoms at a level and not seeing them increase to a significant degree. Okay. So in that sense, we're really just looking to see symptoms trend in the right direction over time. And the analogy I like to use here is weight loss. So you know that you weigh a certain amount today, and if you weigh in every single day, it is not going to be, a linear process down. You'll be up, down. It's going to be this series of spikes and zigzags, right? But it's going to fluctuate somewhere around a mean. right? It's going to fluctuate somewhere depending on, I guess, what you did. You know, you go out for some beers with the boys at the bar, it might spike way up or something, right? But you're not going to be 20 pounds down tomorrow. We know this. That's just outside the realm of possibility. Likewise, if you're at an 8 out of 10 pain today, it's just probably not likely that you're going to be at 0 tomorrow. This is probably going to be a little bit of a process. And because you're at 8 today, somewhere between, like, it might be a little worse tomorrow and it might be at a 9 or it might be at a 7, but like it's going to fluctuate around a mean.
Mm-hmm.
And so we need to recognize that not all increases in pain are bad, and not all decreases in pain mean that it was because of what we did. So it's just going to be natural. Over time, though, we want to see the trend in the right direction. So just like with our weight loss, up, down, but we see the average go down over time. Now, like I said, if you go out for beers with the boys, you might wake up 5 pounds heavier tomorrow. And that's okay, because it's an outlier and you will likely come back to the mean if you get back on track and start doing all the things that you were doing prior, right? One outlier does not significantly deviate. If that becomes a 3 times a week occurrence, though, it might have enough power to change the mean, right? And it might actually start to stagnate your progress or send it in a direction which we are not wanting according to your goal. Well, likewise, if we apply a certain bout of loading, right? So we have our client with knee pain, and let's just say they're lunging, for example, here, and we test them in the office, and a body weight lunge is fine. And then we get them up to, say, 30-pound dumbbells in their hands, and they're able to do that. But it kind of starts to teeter on the edge of those symptoms. Like, all right, there it is. And that first point of crossing from painless to having pain would be called our pain threshold, right? We can move a little further up, and we get to the point of, I don't want to go any higher than that. And that's essentially where you've met the next line, which is pain tolerance, the highest tolerable amount that you could have. Now, we have seen through a number of studies, there's I think there's a systematic review on patients with chronic pain in that population. There's also a paper that came out maybe 2 years ago, but on acute hamstring strains, where they trained people pain threshold or pain free. So let people go up into pain, or they made them stay out of pain. And as long as they did not see their symptoms significantly worsening, the trend was not going in the wrong direction, then they let them continue training. And they saw the outcomes were the same. There were days to return to sport were the same. The group training into pain actually was I think it was non-significant, was stronger at the end as well.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And we've seen that. We've seen that in tendinopathy literature as well, that you can train into pain. So, but like you were asking then, well, how much? And there's certain models, like there's the Silbernagel model that lets people go up to like 0 to 3 is like a green light, 3 to 5 is yellow light, anything over 5 out of 10 is red light. And that's probably a decent way to go about it if your client likes numbers.
For sure.
I use a stoplight system, and I kind of will describe that to patients of what I think green, yellow, red is, but I kind of individualize it for them.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas if I have somebody who's a little more like fearful, and like we're dealing kind of more like fear and apprehension, I'll be like, green light's 0 to maybe just very mild apprehension. Yellow light is, it's starting to make you feel a little tense with it. Red is very strong apprehension.
Mm-hmm.
And stuff like that. But then you got to think about it from the symptom standpoint. And so as long as your symptoms are tolerable in the moment and they're not increasing to an intolerable degree 24 hours later, and any symptoms that do appear settle back down to your baseline relatively quickly after loading, I don't think we can say that that's a bad response, right?
Mm-hmm.
What we would not want to see is we wouldn't want to see you push into an intolerable level of pain. We wouldn't want to see you, the second that you do start to push into pain, it's like with you for hours later, or that it like starts to significantly increase the more reps you do. So that's kind of like the wind up effect.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And we wouldn't want to see you waking up tomorrow and like super tender on your knee. Like you're kind of like limping around or struggling with daily activities. You might be a little sore, but as long as you're getting around your activities, and it's not limiting you to a degree, we're okay. That's really what we're trying to avoid. And if you do experience any of those things, we need to look back on what you just did and say, okay, that loading that we just did right there was obviously beyond your tolerance, right? We overloaded the system. We disrupted homeostasis too much with that right there. And so that is an indication we should pull back. Now, if we get somebody who feels no pain or very mild pain and they're not waking up with any symptoms tomorrow, all the symptoms they feel, they settle super quickly, I would say that's a really good indication they tolerated that level of loading very well, and you could probably progress that load forward. And use a reasonable progression
Mm-hmm.
in that sense.
Mm-hmm.
And if they, were really like edge of tolerance, like they got through it, they didn't know if they really wanted to go any further, or they were kind of, they did wake up the next day and they were a little more sore. And they did feel it through the morning, but as they got moving, it got a little better. Maybe we just repeat that same level of loading, right? Repeat the same sets and reps next time, and see if we get a little bit more of a green light response from that. And so again, like we mentioned, kind of like that Bayesian inference, right? Like that first day in the office, all you have is how did they do with those sets and reps that we just did? How'd they do with this testing? And you kind of have some expectations based on your prior experience with other patients and stuff like that and other presentations. But then the real test comes in. How did they feel tomorrow? And, you follow up and how did that go? And if you see, what they did well there, the next step is probably a little bit forward, and it's like, I tell my patients, sometimes I'll even ask them when I'm like setting up sets and reps. Let's say that we're doing those lunges and I'll be like, how many reps do you think you need to do with this weight to be confident in moving up 5 pounds? And they're like, 12. I'm like, okay, 12 it is. 12 is your cap. When you can get 12 with this weight, move up 5 pounds and try and start working on getting 12 again. Because like, if this was tolerable, you think 5 pounds is going to be the thing that blows you up? Probably not. Probably not. But gradual incremental exposure. And as long as they feel confident doing that, I think we're okay. We just got to kind of set up a system that acknowledges all the factors. And I'll stop talking in case you have anything to chime in with there. But I could talk a little bit about how we mix exertion in with that as well.
Yeah, no, it's really good. And please continue. I guess the only thing that I'd sort of underscore is, from all of the conversations that I've had, not only on the podcast with practitioners like yourself or in the space, common sense seems to be a prevailing theme. For those watching, you'll see the smiles, but without being disrespectful to people, it isn't as common anymore. And I think that's why we need, like you said, these guides, these systems, processes, however you want to refer to them, as a little bit of a guide, just to self-check and becoming aware. And as you said, I love the example. I often use it myself. I say to a client, and it might be in the realms of strength. And I say, hey, look, if we're warming up or if we are testing strength or we are looking at, based on our percentage of 1RM, we've got these incremental sort of undulating progressions. If, say your 1 rep max is 50, but we are working at, say, 35 kilos for 3 sets of 10 or whatever it might be, and we go, right, well, we're going to warm up with a single at 40 or 42 kilos, and we're only doing 1 rep. I say to them, look, if that is only incrementally larger and we're doing a lot less reps, do you think with the law of common sense you'll be able to do that? Yeah, okay, cool. Now, I said, if you go now and put 20 kilos on, do you think that's a good idea? No, exactly. You're asking for trouble. But when you make these incremental progressions, as you said, I think ultimately there's not too much generally that's going to go wrong. It's only if you're doing things that are quite reckless or when you're making big jumps that you may get yourself into trouble. But if you want to continue adding on, please do. And then I'd love to break down some of your videos. And I think, again, as I alluded to before, apart from knee pain, some of the other three, or the other two, I should say, most common pain occurrences in the body, and
Sure.
perhaps how to identify and rectify them. But please add on, I think you said you were going to add on
Exertion.
exertion. Please
Yeah.
do.
Okay. So obviously exercise is a physical stressor, right? And just because somebody is in pain does not necessarily mean that exercise will not be challenging to them or that it cannot have a disruption to physical homeostasis, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, especially with maybe a gym pop client who has not exercised before, your rehab may be the hardest thing they have done in a while. And so there's going to be a difference between, a patient who is getting some back pain with squatting and their 1 RM is 200 kilos and now they're relegated to 20 kilo empty bar, and the gym pop client who maybe has never squatted before. There's going to be a big difference in what that physical load is on them from a relative perspective, and so we have to account for that as well. And so now what we're really doing is we're setting up guidelines to say, how much do I move forward and when, right? So let's pull pain away from it, because I think that's actually the easiest way to do it is actually let's just remove the pain variable for a minute and let's just talk about that from training and how we might auto-regulate with training. And so I want to approach kind of two scenarios, one being RPE loading and another maybe being like something like an AMRAP, because we could utilize either one of those to auto-regulate. So if we have a client, let's just say they do 100 for 6, and if they rate that as a 9 RPE, you might feel comfortable maybe adding 2.5 kilos next week if you're keeping the reps the same, right? If you're dropping the reps, maybe you're comfortable going a little more. If they rated that as an RPE 6, it was easier. You were more comfortable adding 5 kilos, 7.5 kilos, something like that. Okay. Again, depending on what next week looks like. So the higher they rate their exertion, the smaller this incremental step forward should be. The easier they rate that exertion, the less or the more you feel like you can increase that, because the less disruptive you would expect that to be to the system. If you prefer to maybe use like an AMRAP, and let's say you had a target of 6 and they got 6, right? Well, you should say, all right, minimal step forward, if anything, right? You might even want to repeat that load for next week. Likewise, if they got 4, maybe you need to decrease the load a little bit. If they got 12, you should definitely increase it, and probably by quite a bit, right? And so we're just we have to have some sort of reference anchor that we're pulling back to say this was the goal, because when we can say, well, whatever I'm having them do next is what we're anchoring the decision to based on what they got here. All right. So we know that, right? Like the further, harder, add less, easier, add more. Now let's pull pain back into that. So we mentioned pain threshold and pain tolerance. So if we were at pain tolerance, and I'm going to call it edge of tolerance, and they had that kind of like, yeah, I don't know if I'm super comfortable going much further than that. Should we think about maybe like a smaller stepwise increase there? If it was intolerable and they're like, no, like that hurts way too much, we'll decrease the load. And likewise, if they felt no pain with it, you could probably take a larger increase forward. And you're going to figure that out for that particular patient over time. You don't know exactly what it's going to be, but you'll figure it out over time. And some of it will be relative to the movement they are doing, the load that they have on the bar, etc. Right? Because think percentage increases. So then I don't do this all the time, but with some patients, I'll actually set up like a fully auto-regulated program to where they can actually auto-regulate even the frequency of how much they do of their rehab. So if we take, for example, our patient who was back pain squatting, 1 RM, 200 kilos, now can only do 20 kilo empty bar, right? We know for a fact that that empty bar is far, far, far removed from anything that is going to be a high exertion. from a muscular standpoint, right? Symptoms are going to be the limiting factor there. And so do we need to artificially hold back his progression and tell him he can only work 2 times a week or 3 times a week if his symptoms are telling us that he's tolerating it? I don't think that we do, because it's not physically disrupting the system. From that standpoint, we know this. So I call it our zone system. We kind of have a zone 1, 2, 3. So if we have an exertion that is, say, anything sub RPE 5, or we might just say easy or very easy. We have symptoms, which were none or mild. And then our 24-hour response was also none or mild. I will tell my patients, you can do your next exercise progression tomorrow. You don't need to rest, because it's like going for a walk at that point. You can go for a walk every day. Stepping up, if you got kind of like, okay, it was moderate symptoms, we were definitely over threshold, maybe like edge of tolerance. The exertion level was, 5 to 7. It was moderate to challenging. And maybe symptoms were either, okay, I definitely noticed they increased a little bit, but they settled down. Okay. I'm going to say at least take a rest day. Don't do it tomorrow, but give yourself a day of recovery there. Because if any one of those situations happened, I think that recovery is warranted in that sense. And if we were to remove pain, just the exertion itself would warrant a rest day in between, before the next loading cycle. And then if we were at like maximal effort, RPE 10, intolerable symptoms, or symptoms really flared up on you the next day, we might say take a step or 2 back in your progressions. And also, I want you to have 2 to 3 rest days before you go and do that, or you need to feel well recovered before you do that again. And so we can really start to utilize an autoregulatory approach to progressing someone through this, understanding that in rehab and with pain, people are typically going to be kind of relegated to lighter loads that maybe they aren't as used to, but it's not a rule, because we can make exercise very difficult, and we can make exercise high exertion, even in rehabilitation. And so we don't want to kind of like remove ourselves from thinking about that as well. And because do 3 sets of 15 twice a day on something like a heel raise. It's like, you know how much volume that is? Like, what if if you're applying that across the board to somebody, and like, this is somebody who has never done heel raises before, they're going to have trouble extending their knee tomorrow. That's going to be so bad. And you're like, that doesn't fit with like S&C principles, but for some reason that is pretty prevalent across rehab to do stuff like that. So it needs to be anchored to what this person's abilities are. And you can allow that to, we can allow that to manifest, and we can allow the whole program to kind of manifest based on their abilities.
Yeah, no, I think there's a lot of value in there, Jacob. And having, I think, an autoregulatory approach is one of the most underrated factors when it comes to programming. And I think, you've often got to meet the client where they're at, depending on their their understanding and their capabilities is the word I was after. I also find that RIR is sometimes a great way, although often a bit more of an advanced concept, reps in reserve, to highlight or to shadow and to self-check if RPE is sort of in the ballpark. You'll often ask someone, what was the RPE? You explain the definitions, and they go, okay, it's a 6. And you go, okay, so how many reps do you think you could have got with good form? And they might go, 10. And you go, right, well, if that's the case, do you think the RPE was, and obviously this comes with time and experience, but I've even done it myself, or sometimes self-check and ask that. And then, as you said, I think it's really quite strategic by taking pain out of the equation and then putting it back in to get a little bit more accuracy on that. So I think that's going to be great for a lot of people listening, because I do believe most people struggle with some sort of pain these days. It's very seldom. I know when I was... Yeah, exactly. It's when I was starting off as a very naive trainer many years ago, you think, right, I'm going to get a client, I can just program. And then you're like, oh, real humans, there's obstacles here. And now it's a lot of, there's a lot sort of before, I guess, if you look at an iceberg, it's like there's all this under the surface we have to address first, like positioning, joints, movement, pattern, skill acquisition, general conditioning. And then maybe we can program, you think, oh, you're going to be getting athletes. And even then there's contraindications and obstacles, which ultimately, make us better practitioners, if I'm honest. I'd love to delve in and segue into, so for those who might not be aware, highly encourage them to check out your Instagram. I will obviously link it. It's phenomenal. I love what you do with your infographics, with your videos, and you provide, again, simple solutions, actionable takeaways to, impingements and pain. And I think, seldom do I meet someone that's only back pain, knee pain, and shoulder pain seem to be the most popular. And again, if there's in your experience others, please, highlight them. But could you address those types of pain? And obviously, I'm sure you could go into much depth, but more on the simplistic side, what the most common instances of why we get this pain, I guess, even more for strength athletes or people in the gym, back pain, knee pain, and shoulder pain, and what usually is going on, and how do we look at rectifying it? And again, there's probably multiple answers to this, but if you could give your experience on it, I'd love that.
Okay. Yeah. So that's probably the answer to like why do we experience the pain and all that. I don't have an answer to. I really can't give you anything that would not be I would say too oversimplifying the situation. I can say it's multifactorial. Okay. There is going to be a sensory aspect to it. There's a psychological aspect to it. There's cognition, there's emotion, there's all of it kind of is going to play into this pain experience. Okay. Now, understanding that if we were to kind of hone in on something that maybe active individuals deal with pretty regularly, I would say overloading the system. So more load on the system than you are adapted to handle. Right. And that might be a change in a stressor. It might be the change in a magnitude of the stressor. Okay. But we need to realize there is a ton of interweaving pieces. And it's, risk. There's a lot of risk factors for injury that are kind of listed out there. But none of them are necessarily causative of injury on their own. So for, let's say, knee pain, you might hear restricted ankle flexibility or something is a risk factor for knee pain, or a quad weakness is a risk factor for knee pain, or hip weakness is a risk factor for knee pain. But none of these things on their own cause pain. What they might do is have an impact on the physiology of the system, and then somewhere along the lines, we overload that system. Okay. So the way I like to think about risk factors is less about is anything really a risk factor, but more so what is stable versus unstable. A stable risk factor is something that's present and has kind of just been present for a long time. It's been present in the ecosystem and the system has adapted around it. Okay. So let's say a good one there would be the degree of pronation and supination in your foot. We don't see the differing injury rates between people that quote unquote overpronate versus supinate. And it's a very stable risk factor because the person who pronates is probably always pronated, right? And the person who's supinated is probably always supinated. So it's very stable. Now, we could also say that there might be a certain change in risk from running on a certain surface or a certain shoe. So if we take somebody who has always run in this one shoe A over here, and they're running, however many miles we want to say, let's just call it 10 kilometers a week. And so they're out here running 10 kilometers a week in this shoe A. And then they go and they get a new pair of shoes, shoe B, and they continue to run 10 kilometers per week. The alteration of the shoe is now an unstable risk factor. Now the mileage didn't change. The load, quote unquote load, did not change, but the load that the tissue experienced did, because the distribution of the load across the tissues changed due to a change in the shoe.
Mm-hmm.
And this might be part of why we can see a beneficial effect to having multiple shoes when you run, not just running in one pair all the time, but maybe having a couple pairs.
Mm-hmm.
And because I guess you're more adapted to variable stress patterns. Well, if we bring that into the gym, you do a good due diligence of tracking all your workouts and tracking your volume and tracking your intensities and all this stuff. And you're like, I'm not spiking my workloads, but maybe you change a movement out that you weren't used to, and you didn't give yourself maybe an introductory period to that movement. And you kind of jumped right into RP 8, 9 at your normal peak volumes. And then something started to feel a little beat up and got irritated. That could be one way that we lead to overloading the system. We could also kind of have chronic under recovery. And so, we know that there's a stress fatigue, stress recovery balance that has to happen. So you might be in a situation where the unstable factor was your sleep patterns or your stress patterns or your nutrition or your hydration or a relationship with a family member or something became unstable. Your system, your ecosystem of your body changed somewhere. And maybe this led to you not recovering as well to a stress load which you had been adapted to prior. The system is different now though. And so over time you might feel that you're getting more and more beat up. It's like, and that's why a lot of like my patients will say, yeah, I kind of felt it and I started to kind of try and push through it, and then it kind of just didn't get better, and then it started getting worse, and the system was getting more and more sensitized as you went along. You kept pushing, and we didn't recognize that was happening. And so can I pull it back to like our autoregulatory nature? I think autoregulation and recognition of the changes to the system is really kind of the big key component to injury mitigation.
Mm-hmm.
Managing volume and sets and reps and all that stuff, that gets a ton of the press, and it's huge. And we can even, I think that also kind of clarifies maybe even some of the points around like, why do certain people move a certain way and they never get hurt, and other people move a certain, like they quote unquote look better with their movement, but they do get hurt. And there's genetic factors there, like we can go into. And if a person is adapted to a certain movement and they've just had a logical progression, they probably will continue to adapt to it because they're used to the stress distribution over their body. But maybe if they change something, maybe now they're at an increased risk of injury for a while, and they need to maybe pull back on another factor being kind of the volume, intensity, et cetera, to give a kind of an introductory period to these changes. And then you begin to adapt to the new thing within the system. So back pain, shoulder pain, knee pain, all this stuff, you kind of have to look at it. I like to look at it through that lens, which is like, there is no real one answer, but rather a multitude of things that could have played into it. And really I think we're trying to write the best story as to maybe why it happened. But at the end of the day, we don't really know. We can't really say for sure in most cases.
Mm-hmm.
You get hit by a bus, it's pretty obvious.
Yeah.
But in most cases, we probably can't be totally sure exactly why. But we maybe don't need to know either. It's probably a much better use of our time if we focus on what we need to do now to move forward, and then keep these principles in mind of stable, unstable, gradual progression, et cetera, which are kind of rules of an adaptive system, and just use those as a general guide and say, let's adhere to those things. And if we do that, we are really we're doing the best we can, you know? And if we're not doing those things, maybe we adjust something to do better. And if it's like glaringly obvious there was something that we didn't account for, we point it out and we say, oh yeah, you changed your shoes and you didn't kind of intro your mileage with that. That could definitely be a factor. Next time, if you change your shoes, pull your mileage back for a couple of weeks and kind of work your way back forward. I bet you'll be, much better off that way. So if it's glaringly obvious, point it out. If it's not, we have to live with uncertainty too. So roundabout answer to saying, I don't know.
Yeah, but it's like that. I mean, I think a lot of people expect a one-word answer, and that is always a dichotomy when you're, with patients, because it depends seems to be a verbiage, because we need to know more oftentimes, and we don't want to leave the person going, well, this is it. And then they go, oh, that's the holy grail. It's almost like when a client will come and say, hey, what's the best exercise for this? And it's like, well, technically, I mean, there could, in context, there is, some information. We could pair exercises, but it depends on who you are, what your skill is, how often you can train, all of these things, if you got any injuries. And to go back again and highlight a point, I think everyone is so focused on overtraining, where seldom do people ever overtrain. They just under recover. I mean, you have to be really sadistic to get to a point, usually in my experience, of true overtraining, because your body will pull you back far beyond that. And from the trends that I see, Jacob, and I don't know if this is true in your world, but I see a lot of people neglecting sleep. I see a lot of people who don't want to have a pragmatic approach. I think and I'll just generalization for people listening. This is a generalization. I'm going to preface that. Men train too hard, but with not enough precision or sort of attention to skill or technique. And I find females, and this again, it's not always true, don't train hard enough or with enough volume, because there's a stigma that they'll get big and jacked, or they can't train too hard. Not always the case. Sometimes it can be reversed and there's other things, and I don't want to just put people in a box, but I do often find that. And sort of by introducing some of these concepts and making people aware and getting people to think critically and having a graded approach. I know I'll use a basic example, COVID. And in Australia, we've had it pretty good. But, my clients, they came back into the gym and I said, hey, guys, look, this is what we're going to do. We're going to pull volume massively, especially for those of you who have not had weights out of the program. I know you guys are all keen, but I said, I'll tell you what. I said, you watch how many people come in and go within the next week, because you're reintroducing a stimulus which yes, we may have adapted to before, but it's not there. And oftentimes it is hard, even for myself. You sort of go, well, I know what I can lift and can do, but it's sometimes by pulling back a little bit that we can avoid some of these things. Or again, as you said, using these signs and listening to the body to go, okay, well, this is obviously the body telling me that perhaps there is something that's not adapted to, that we've not accounted for, even if we don't know. And we can't go, oh, well, we never put a label on what exactly that thing was, because the reality of it is, as you explained there, there's too many confounding factors. And do we even need to put a label on it anyway, if we can alleviate and progress from it in the future?
Yeah, it's a couple of great things you touched on there was you really have to think about who you are talking to and who you're working with, right? So on the overtraining point, I would totally agree with you. I think that most people who are able to self-regulate their own training program will almost never get there. Where I think we tend to see true overtraining occur is maybe like team sports, where there is a fixed schedule of things that people have to do, and there is they are not even in control of their training load, and it doesn't matter maybe how much what they feel like. They just have to push forward because that's the plan.
Mm-hmm.
And their volume of workload just tends to be way higher than the average person ever would. But whenever you and I, we have the ability to just say, hey, I don't feel so hot this week, we can, like, we kind of naturally will pull ourselves back to some degree, or like our training's just going to suck for a while. And, some people will hop programs at that point and start over with something that's naturally lighter, or they might take a deload week, and some people will just push through it. I think that's something, though, as coaches, we have to be thinking about too, though, because sometimes if you are a coach and you have a client, you need to make sure that there is open lines of communication there to, like, tell me how you feel. Because if you are like the type of person as a client that's like, I say jump, you say how high, it's like, you might do whatever I put on paper regardless of how you feel, and you might push yourself to that point of under recovery as well. And it becomes a failure of communication between the two of us. And so having kind of those open lines of communication is vitally important to kind of, help make those decisions, because that's really that's the biggest part of our job, right? Is managing people and helping them to make some of those decisions in terms of the auto regulation and stuff like that. And you mentioned COVID as well. You think about how quickly things changed for everyone, in the world. From some people were laid off from jobs. People had changes in their environment. They're working from home. Their kids are home at the same time. It's loud, noisy. Their social situations are different. They're not around their coworkers anymore. We're all wearing masks everywhere we go. We're constantly thinking about the stress of if I get this thing, what's it going to mean? You're trying to keep your family safe. And what did we see near the end of last year? Report after report after report of increased rates of burnout. And it's like, was that surprising? Like, no, because we're adaptable systems, and there's rules to adaptable systems, and it is not, isolated to physical stressors. It's everywhere. And we have to understand that when you haven't been exposed to something for a long time, like our clients who didn't have weights for months on end, their system has changed and is adapted around that. And so now coming back and adding weights in is now an unstable factor, and we need to ease back in and allow the system to adapt there. We were on our way to a more digitalized society in a sense. We really were. And ordering things and having them shipped to our house, and probably more people working from home at some point in the future, and Zoom meetings and all this stuff. But the fact that it got thrown on us maybe a decade faster than what the plan would have been, right? We see that maybe that didn't have such a wonderful effect, especially when compounded on top of all the other, stressors that came with this whole pandemic. And so, yeah, we have to think about who are we with, what did they have? So, people who didn't have weights versus people who did have weights. What is someone's behavior patterns like? That client who is no pain, no gain, you might have to have a different message with that person than you do with the person who naturally gets it, or somebody who's just a little more kind of timid and tends to not push themselves in the first place. You might be able to jump them right back into kind of what closer to what normal would be, than somebody who is like, no, I'm ready to go to failure today, bro.
This is true. And I think I always talk about this with everyone of my clients, and also when I speak to other coaches and like-minded practitioners, of how important the lifestyle is. If we did break it into a trifecta of training, nutrition, and lifestyle, it's so underrated. How I always say to clients, I'm like, look, the lifestyle is directly correlated to your success in training and nutrition. And you've just gone over a lot of those points, because it's kids, it's mental stresses, it's abilities, it's things changing. And I am very much someone who is a fan of an approach that is sustainable, flexible, and enjoyable. And if it doesn't meet that criteria, I often say to people, then it's not going to be worth it in the long term, because ultimately there is never smooth sailing in life. There's never a perfect time to start. There's always going to be an obstacle, a birthday, a wedding, an injury, a new dog. It's just things are going to happen. And I think the sooner we acknowledge that and we can become adaptable, and as coaches be able to empower our clients and share skill sets and tools with them. So we go, hey, look, it might not be the best thing we can do right now, but we don't live on paper. We live in the real world. And if we're still progressing towards the goal and we're enjoying ourselves, then surely this is a solution, rather than going, I have to have this binary on, off, black, white. When I can't do it, everything stops. And when I can, everything comes on. I even think a lot of people at a high level adopt that approach, and it isn't healthy. And I would argue, as someone who I look up to, Dr. Eric Helms always puts, that balance is much harder initially to practice than the hardcore on-off approach, but it's far more rewarding in the long term. And a lot of the concepts and the principles that we've spoken about today, I think, are the things that we need to acknowledge a little bit more, because things aren't just as clear cut as this is right and wrong. There's multiple factors. We're dealing with people, and we are all individual to some degree, and acknowledging that is super critical. And giving your clients permission, I say with my programs, I say, look, this is a guide. It's not a gospel. There's times where you've got to not follow that thing. There's times where you've got to walk out the gym and go, not today, and I think, like, if you can preface that from the start, someone will have a better relationship with their health, with their nutrition, training, rehabilitation, whatever it might be, for a more successful approach, rather than going, okay, this is going to be the gospel and I have to do this, which unfortunately never seems to work for long-term results, at least anyway.
That brings me back to something that you said starting the whole podcast, which was, you get started and you're like, this is the way it is on paper, right? Like, this is the way it is. And then you're like, you get in there like, oh crap, like real world, that's different, but the more you read and the more literature you dive into, the more you actually see that the plethora of options available to you is so much wider than what you thought it was. And we need to, I imagine most of your listeners here are probably in that evidence-based community. We need to remember, our conversations, what you hear on all of the podcasts and all the social media posts and everything, typically centers around, how do we optimize? How do we get the most out of everything? And I think that it's a very good reminder for us to always kind of remember the Pareto principle, the 80-20 rule, right? The 80% of our results are coming from 20% of our efforts. Most people are going to, a good portion of the results are show up, be consistent, have a logical progression, right? Like, we can talk MRVs and, MEVs and figuring out what might be the perfect set count and intensity and RPE for us to be. Should we be progressing RPE week to week, or should we hold it steady? Should we be progressing sets, or should we hold them steady? And like, these are great conversations to have. Like, this pushes us forward, but we need to remember that in a complex system, it's not going to fit on paper perfectly. And we are talking about optimal is a point on a spectrum, and optimal doesn't mean effective, and suboptimal does not mean ineffective. A perfect example of this, I was currently putting together a lecture on just on strength and the intensity ranges for strength, right? And we know, due to the SAID principle, higher intensities optimize strength, right? Perfect. Okay. And we know that wherever you want to train strength, that really depends on where you're going to test it as well. So the whole strength endurance continuum. And so I was looking into it, and it's like, all right, let's brush up on this. And so I'm looking at some of the studies that train like 80% one rep max versus 30% one rep max. I start looking at more and more studies, and obviously the trend is the trend, right? Higher loads obviously are better. But the way the conversation has always been centered is like, maybe it's 85%, maybe it's 65%, but it only ever talks about like, if you want to get stronger, you should train above 80% or 65%, depending on who you're talking to. And we can actually start to equate optimizing with effective. So go and look at some of the studies on high intensity versus low intensity and recognize that the 30% 1RM group didn't get weaker. They just got stronger at half the rate. There's one study in particular where they did leg extensions. Anybody who wants this, just shoot me a DM on Instagram. And I'll give you the reference because I don't have it off the top of my head. But they did leg extensions. And I think this was looking at like reps to failure. And a group did 30% 1RM. They stayed 14 reps off of failure, and they still got stronger on a 1RM test. Like, that's insane.
Yeah.
Like, that's insane. Challenge the system in any way. And like, you can see some progress. Now it might be, and it's not optimal, and I would not advocate for that. But what it does, it opens up the option, right? And it says, hey, you know what? Maybe if I'm really feeling run down today, and I normally am going to do 3 sets of leg extensions, maybe I'm just going to go and I'm going to hit 1 set and I'm going to get out of here today because, you know, I want to go spend some time with my kid. I don't want to be here today. I'm not in it today. And that's probably not going to kill your progress. You know, that's not going to stop you. And you're not going to even remember that you did it a year from now. You are going to remember that you came in. You're going to remember that you're still training. You're going to remember like your consistency over time, all this stuff that like the 80-20 rule, right? Like don't forget that little thing. And for us in our community, like those things have become so second nature to us. Mm-hmm. You know, consistency, mindset, recovery, like those things are second nature to the point that, yeah, we can talk about the other 80%. We can talk about the big stuff or the little stuff to say. But there's eventually going to be a point where we do run into a roadblock. And I can think back to when my son was born, like through my training life for a loop, you know, it took me a minute to get back into it. And had I really thought about it, it's like, yeah, you know what? I could have just trained twice a week for 30 minutes. And if I had done that, it would have been better than the 6 weeks I took off doing nothing. And I just didn't think of it that way. And it's good for us to pull ourselves back and realize that we don't have to be optimal 100% of the time if optimal means sporadic. And for a lot of our clients, you know, consistency isn't second nature yet. And what they can do consistently will be much better than what they can do optimally.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I love all of that. It's right up my alley. And I think the sooner we can all realize that, and it takes time, and perhaps that's our role to help people and empower them to see that, the better relationship you have with your training. And the irony of all of that is that you often get better results because you don't have this mental stress of, I missed a rep or I missed 3 grams of rice. It's like, it's not going to matter. And funny enough, I actually just finished reading Richard Koch's the 80-20 principle from Pareto's law. And I absolutely love that. It's something that I've always been fascinated with and learning it. And I encourage people to read it because it's much more than just what it is on the surface, and it can be applicable to many things as well. But for me, I think the key word there is consistency as well. And it's such underrated, but consistency doesn't mean consistent in optimism. In optimal, like you said, because it's so subjective, but it's what we do most of the time that counts. And I think there's a lot of key takeaways. And I think if people want to have a listen back to that again, I think there's a lot of value in that, where people can alleviate a lot of stress in their life and create a much more sustainable approach. Because as you said, there will come a time where you cannot do the maximum of everything, whether that's when you start a family or whether that's something unforeseen comes in, and you have to, if you don't be adaptable, life will force you to be adaptable in many respects,
or it'll break you.
Correct. Absolutely. Absolutely.
One or the other, right?
It's you learn one way or the other way, and sometimes the hard way is inevitably what needs to be done. in life.
But as long as you learn something from it, I guess it was a good lesson.
Well, this is true, because it's inevitable. And I think, there's this concept of, and I've accepted it over the past few years, and it's hard, where you just go, well, you you really can't focus. You can't control what you can't control. There's a lot going on, whatever your belief systems are. Focus on the things that you can control. And, I'm currently reading The Obstacle is the Way by Ryan Holiday. It's phenomenal. I'm big into reading now, like yourself. If you would have told me this 10 years ago, I would have been like, what? I mean, this computer's stacked on books, but, obviously you can't just consume, you've got to apply. And I will preface that, but I will admit the more books I read and apply and understand, the better I'm able to, not only articulate things in life, but also to live a better life, because ultimately we've been here for a while, not a great deal, but we've been here for a while. And a lot of things have been done, said before. And if you can actually take that and apply it, you might find that, oh, wow, funny that it actually worked. And you can be a better practitioner or a coach if that's someone you are. But even for any individual, you can just be a better communicator and use these skills to create a better life for yourself. And ultimately, I do believe, coming back to simplicity, that it is the essence of a lot of happiness in life. It's the simple basics. It's getting up with purpose, moving your body, having conversations, spending time with good people, giving something back. It's not hard. And I often think sometimes it's the things that people are doing, not doing, that can inflict them, because I often see people that can't string together even the basics, and they wonder why they're always, ill of health. And I'm like, well, you don't get 8 hours sleep most of the time. You don't have to, but it's like most of the time. You don't eat any good food. You smoke, you take recreational drugs. You hardly get to the gym. And when you do, you annihilate yourself. I'm like, if you actually put it down on paper, it's pretty damn simple. Like it's, like a lot of the time it's just doing the basic things in life. And funnily enough, your body does what it needs to do. Or as a wise friend said, he's a bodybuilder in his 80s. And he said to me, Alex, he goes, if you give the body what it needs, most of the time it'll do what it needs to do, unless you get fairly unlucky. And I thought about that and I think about it more and I go, he's often right. Oftentimes we're the one, we as humans do things that inflict this pain. And we go, oh, actually, that's probably our own doing. But I'm rambling. Jacob, I appreciate your time. It's been a great conversation. Before we leave, a couple of rapid fire questions I'd love to ask. It's a bit more fun in nature.
All right.
The first one is, if you could choose a superpower, what would it be and why?
Fly sounds a lot of fun. Yeah. Bird's eye view, getting places, no traffic. That'd be nice. But you got to be able to fly fast, not just fly like super speed on top of it.
Yeah. So you could basically get around the world in an hour.
Exactly. Yeah. And with my travel schedule, I think that'd be perfect.
Mm-hmm. Especially with the, everything as well going on at the minute. We just
right.
Have done this podcast.
No more coach. That would be my superpower, right?
It'd be brilliant. And what about if you could invite anyone to dinner? You can, let's say 3 people, dead or alive. Oh. And this is a big one. So whatever comes to mind, who would you invite to your dinner?
Oh man, I don't know. I'm not good at this question. I've been asked this question and I never have an answer for it, in all honesty. Honestly, I am I'm a family-centered person. Yes. I would probably honestly just take 3 of my family members that probably, that I haven't seen anymore, or that, have passed away. Mm-hmm. I kind of get that time with them. Because those are the best memories I have, is the, going, having dinners with family and weekends and stuff like that. So it's I guess a boring answer, but that's my answer for that one.
Yeah. No, I think that's a really great answer, because again, it's sometimes the things that are right under your nose are the best things. It doesn't have to be elaborate or intricate, which has kind of been a theme here. And if you could get a message out to everyone say it was on social media, it was a post, a little blurb, a picture even, and you could put it out and everyone would see it. It would come up on everyone's Facebook, everyone Instagram's feed and YouTube. What would be a message that you'd just love to get out to people to see and internalize?
The progress you make today doesn't matter. Just taking the first step forward matters. And don't try and predict the perfect pathway to where you want to go. Take the first step and see where the next step is and take that one. And just keep going.
Mm-hmm.
And as long as you have a general sense of direction, you'll get there.
Persistence. Love it. And my final question, which I ask all my guests, is could you identify a fear that you've had in your life or that you still have, what it is and how you overcome it, or if you're still battling it, what you're doing to overcome it? And it could be big, it can be small, whatever it means to you.
Yeah, I think it's better when you say, what have I still overcoming? I'm a bit of an introspective person, so I'm a perfectionist.
Mm-hmm.
Some of my battle quite a bit is, procrastinating with things until I feel like they are perfect, and needing to take my own advice and say, sometimes done is better than perfect, and take the first step and just do it. But I would say that in terms of a fear, failure, like that all the things I'm working for are not going to pan out somewhere. I think that plays into the perfectionism a bit, which is, like I've had this idea that if I make everything perfect, it's going to reduce the chances of failure. And what I'm doing to overcome that is recognizing it first, recognizing that it's real, and also recognizing that one, it's normal, but also that the fear of it is normal, and recognizing that it's not wrong to have these fears. But just as I would help any patient with any fear, take the first step, and gradual, you got to find that you got to put yourself out there. And so for me, putting myself out there one little step at a time and recognizing that maybe the consequences aren't going to be as bad as I thought they were.
Yeah, I can resonate with that. That seems to be a reoccurring theme with most of the people who I speak to, especially people who are quite articulate and creative and passionate about what they do. We often, we fear, as, interesting as that concept might be, but oftentimes it isn't as bad. We suffer more in imagination than we do in reality. And I've come to the conclusion that from having these conversations, because it seems to be a very, very strong, vivid, reoccurring theme, that perhaps this is what makes people like yourself so good at what you do, because you're constantly thinking that the bar needs to be better with perfectionism and that you can't fail. So you're overcompensating in some way of effort and delivery so that you actually deliver something which is far above par, which inevitably is not a bad thing at all.
No, there's a healthy dose of anxiety.
There's
a healthy dose of anxiety, and anxiety can breed motivation, but I won't get into that. If you ever want to do a part 2, we can talk psychology all day. And I'll go into all that, but thanks for having me on, man. This has been a lot of fun.
For sure. No, my pleasure. Thanks for being generous with your time. And I definitely love a part 2. Psychology is, something I'm extremely fascinated about. Before we go, for people who want to link up and find more about you and what you do and your team, where's the best place to do so, Jacob?
So my best platform is Instagram. I'm on there at dr.jacob.harden, Harden with an E. You'll be able to find me pretty readily there. Shoot me a DM if you have any questions, want to chat about anything. I'm always open to them. I'm always checking that kind of stuff. I'm also on just every single, social media platform out there. If you don't do the social media thing, shoot me an email. Prehab101@gmail.com. Okay. And you'll find me.
Fantastic. And as always, I'll put the links in the description below, and I will give you some positive feedback and attest to you are phenomenal at replying, especially with someone that has, a great number of followers and also is a busy dad and a practitioner. I always respect people who, are able to get back in good time. I understand when people can't, but I think it's a sign of someone who's very, very genuine and very humble. So I will definitely preface that and encourage people to reach out, especially if they've got anything to ask from a place, that they want to learn and expand their knowledge. Guys, I will say thank you for everyone for tuning in. Of course, if it's safe to do so, please, if you love these episodes and you enjoyed this one, share it around, leave a rating and a review on iTunes, Spotify, or whatever you're listening or watching to. And of course, if you're on YouTube, I've got to say it, guys, like, comment, and subscribe. Really, really appreciate that. And of course, until the next episode, stay fearless.